Hello, everybody. It's Friday afternoon. Welcome back to the 5th edition of Hodinkee Live. And today I'm here with a man who needs no introduction, who I'm going to introduce anyway. Hodinkee founder, Mr. Benjamin Clymer.
Hello, everybody.
Has joined us. And we're going to get into some of the big news of the week very shortly. But first, just a couple of housekeeping things. We got some feedback from you guys that you would like us to leave a little bit more time for interaction with you folks via the questions you send in. So don't forget to send them in, because we're definitely going to make more time for that at the end of this segment. Friday Live now is going to run at 1 p.m. unless otherwise announced. So that's kind of our set time for doing this thing. And we're going to jump right in with Ben, who is going to give us some analysis of what went on at the Geneva auctions over the last weekend. It was actually a huge weekend, just in terms of records being made, records being set, records being broken, and super high profile stuff going on auction. So.
Yeah, so this weekend was obviously, I should say this past weekend, was obviously the big May auctions. There are typically two Geneva auction weekends, one in May, one in November. The November ones tend to be a little bit higher profile, but this year May seemed to be pretty strong. We had some major wins for the category in general. Philips, I believe, placed 7 different records for different references. The biggest one, of course, being the Bao Dai, which was a reference 6062 with a black galvanic dial. It is one of 2 black 6062s. One of 3 6062 blacks there are. This one being owned by Bao Dai, of course. This is kind of really a legendary watch. It's been on the market since about 2003. People have known about it. It has been within, I would say, 1 or 2 different collections over the past 15 years ago or so. The average selling price of this watch when it last sold was about $330,000 to $360,000. So obviously, to go from around $330,000, we'll say $350,000 on a good day, to $5 million in the course of 15 years is pretty remarkable.
Yeah, that's kind of staggering, and it does sort of show what's been going on with the market for highly desirable vintage watches as a whole.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is kind of a great bellwether. I mean, this is now the most expensive Rolex ever sold. I should say, the Bao Dai, it's not like this watch came out of nowhere. As I said, it's been known for the past at least 15 years. We did a summit, the Hodinkee Summit, about a year and a half ago, and we had Eric Koo and Andrew Shear, both of them there, and obviously 2 formidable Rolex experts. And we said, if you could have one Rolex watch, period, what would it be? And they both answered separately the Bao Dai. So this is really the end game for Rolex collecting. So to see it go for $5 million it's crazy. I mean, $5 million for a generally uncomplicated watch. This is not a perpetual watch. It's perpetual in the sense that it's self-winding, but it's not a perpetual calendar. It just happens to have a triple calendar and moon phase. The counter to that would be the Selassie 2497, which is a perpetual calendar, very similar looking watch, yellow gold, black dial, one of 2, and that sold for $2.9 million at Christie's.
Right. And also an interesting provenance. Haile Selassie was the last emperor of Ethiopia. Bao Dai was the last emperor of Vietnam. So both watches with strong connections to sort of fascinating, if controversial, historical figures.
Yep.
And the price difference is due to...
Well, I think, Rolex is Rolex right now. And as Arthur has said recently, Rolex is really becoming king. Does it make sense that a non-complicated Rolex sells for more than a complicated Patek Philippe? If they are both yellow gold with black dials, both one of at most 3 pieces in the world, I would say kind of objectively, probably not. But people love Rolex. And I will say also that even though the 2497 was in truly honest condition, the radium had fallen out of the hands, it wasn't in as kind of clean condition as the 6062 Rolex, and condition today really means a lot. So I understand why the disparity. That said, does it make sense on paper? Probably not.
Yeah. There was also a significant amount paid for a yellow gold Paul Newman Daytona.
Yeah. So the 6263 Paul Newman Daytona. So this is a watch that, when we wrote up, the first time on the site, it almost feels like people think they see this watch a lot. They think that they see a gold Paul Newman Oyster all the time. You just don't. There are 3 of them. I have seen 2 of them in the metal. The third is with an Italian collector that I don't know personally. These are hyper rare watches. As I said, 3 in the world. You just don't see them around. And again, you see the gold 6241, 6264, even things like that. But a gold Oyster you just don't see. And again, Rolex is king. And what's the king of the Rolex world? The Paul Newman. So this is really, as I said on Instagram at one point, kind of the ultimate FU watch. This is a Paul Newman Oyster case, gold bracelet, just killer looking watch all around. And to see that go again for $3.7 million is really astonishing, considering what Paul Newman's used to sell for and what a watch like this used to sell for.
And again, it's really not so much about the objective physical attributes of the watch. It's really about what's been going on in the Rolex collector community and the desirability of ultra-rare, in good condition Rolexes as a whole.
Correct. I mean, this is a Valjoux 72. You know, you can buy a Valjoux 72 in any number of second-tier brands for $1,200, something like that. So this is not a particularly fascinating watch historically or horologically speaking. But from a collectability standpoint, again, Rolex is hot, gold is hot, and the Paul Newman is always hot. So you put those three together, and you've got a very special result.
And speaking of horologically interesting,
yes.
Probably the most horologically interesting watch that's going to come up in the entire auction season was actually passed on.
Correct. Correct. So this is the Caliber 89. So the Caliber 89, for those of you who don't know, is the most complicated Patek Philippe ever to this day. Exceeds even the Grave Super complication, on which it is loosely based. More complicated than the Star Caliber that came out about 10 years later. This is it. This is the holy grail of Patek Philippe. There are 4 of them. They're pocket watches, 1 in each metal. The yellow gold piece, which is the one that was auctioned, is the first, arguably the most historically important. This is a funny watch. I mean, as Jack said, this is the most kind of important horologically speaking watch of the year, bar none, and it failed to sell. And what I mean by that is that it didn't hit its reserve. It came very, very close. So the reserve on this watch was 6.5 million Swiss. Bidding got up to 6.45. So 50,000 more Swiss and the watch would have sold.
That's kind of astonishing.
It really is. And there's many different people out there that have different ideas on why it didn't sell, things like that. This watch has been around for a while. We even covered it on the site, I think around this time last year. Christie's had it at first on private sale, and the offer was, I think, either 10 or 11 million dollars.
I mean, for bidding to get that close to the reserve and stop, just 50,000 shy, which is nothing to people who have a war chest to bid on something like this. That's a smoking gun for something.
Yep, no, I agree. And I think, a lot of people, as I've said, have kind of come up with hypotheses about why it didn't sell. Maybe they started the bidding too high, maybe the reserve was a little bit too high, things like that. To give you an idea, generally speaking, a positive way to generate a lot of interest in a watch is to put out a low reserve. It gets people thinking, maybe it'll go low, maybe I can afford that. So, had the reserve on this watch been 2 million to, or I should say the estimate had been maybe 2 to 4 million, something like that, then maybe more people would generate interest and maybe more people would bid. But to start the bidding, I believe in the 6s, or if not the high 5s, I mean, that's a lot of money to come out of the gate for sure. Right. And now I think the owner of that watch is going to have a very difficult time selling the watch for no other reason besides the fact that it's had a very public kind of failure at auction. It's still the Caliber 89. I mean, this is still an amazing watch, and I think to anybody who doesn't care,
there's never going to be any more.
Absolutely. To anybody who cares about watchmaking and what this watch means to the world, it's an amazing buy. If you just don't care about what the rest of the collectible world thinks of it.
So let's talk about the that very funky. White gold.
Funky is a good word for it. It's a generous word for it. So I hate this watch in every way. As I think Stephen said the other day, it's just an ugly watch. It's just kind of I shouldn't say objectively because all taste is personal, but it is just an ugly watch. It does not bring to mind what a Submariner is in any way. As Stephen said very well in his piece earlier this week, the watch that used to be the record holder of the Submariner was a big crown. It was tropical. It was just mint. You could see those wide bevels. It was just a perfect example of what a Submariner should be. This doesn't even have a serial number. And again, as I think somebody said very astutely in one of our comments on Stephen's story, that if this watch showed up at a dealer or showed up on eBay or something like that, everybody would say, this is a Franken watch. And so, I mean, we know what these watches are. We know that they're real, but to not have a serial number and to go this high is crazy to me.
I mean, I have to confess, I found it kind of sexy. It reminded me of a Thunderbird a little bit, obviously.
Yep.
But I sort of liked it.
Okay, I mean, again, taste is personal. It's white gold. I mean, the bark finish. It's just a crazy watch.
I dug the bark finish.
For sure, I believe that. But still, I get it. It's one of 3. It's a certified prototype. It's a really neat thing. So, we have been talking a lot about auctions, and, we wanted to kind of bring you guys into the room. So in total transparency, I wasn't there, Jack wasn't there, Arthur was there for us, but we wanted to bring somebody that was even closer involved to this space, and that is Mr. Alfredo Paramico. So Paramico is a friend of the show. He's a monster collector. At one point owned the largest collection of white metal Patek Philippe's, valued well north of $20 million at the time. He owned the unique 2497 Platinum. He had Steel 1518, the one that sold at auction. He has really been a mega collector through the years, and he was actually an underbidder on 1 or 2 of the pieces that we've talked about so far, and the winner of a crazy Daytona that we'll talk about right now.
Fantastic.
Alfredo, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. I can know you very well.
Hi, Alfredo. How are you?
I'm here. That's perfect. Thank you so much, Ben.
Oh, it's my pleasure. So we wanted to talk to you a little bit about your experience at the auctions. So you were bidding on a few different pieces, including the 2497 Selassie watch, correct?
Yes, I basically let's say I made 4 or 5 watches this auction season, and if I want, we can go through the details so that I also can give you a kind of explanation of why I love these watches so much. The first one was for sure the 2497. I think it's probably one of the most important Patek ever made. It's on top of being an historical watch, because we all know the story of the watch. The watch was simply amazing. I think the layout of the dial, the black color, the incredible engraving on the case back made this watch one of the most important. And it's not a secret that the new owner knew perfectly what he was doing. I think it's impossible not to start from the Baudai.
Yeah.
As you know very well, we all know the Baudai from 2002. We know where the Baudai basically stayed during these last 15 years, and I am a fan, of course, of the Osimo phase, but I have to tell you that I never had the pleasure to put the Baudai on my wrist. And when I went to New York for the exhibition, and when I put the Baudai on my wrist, I have to tell you that probably it was the best looking watch I ever had the pleasure to put on my wrist. And you know, I had some great watches, but trust me, this is exactly the feeling I had.
Yeah.
I'm not surprised at all by the 5 million mark. It's impossible to tell if the watch was overpaid or not. Actually, I don't think so. I think that even if it's a very strong result, I think it falls within a logic of fair market price. The watch was simply amazing, and I like to basically compare the 2497 with Baudai. Of course, it's impossible to compare 2 different watches. One is the Patek calendar, the other one is the triple calendar, one is Patek, one is Rolex, whatever. But think of 2 watches made more or less the same age in the 50s, and both with the black dial.
Yeah.
The dial of the Baudai was so glossy, was so shiny. And this really, to me, made this watch amazing. Really amazing. Another watch I tried to buy until the very end, I've been underbidder, is the magnificent 6263, also known as the Legend.
Right.
As you know very well, it's just one of the 3 Paul Newman horses with the gold case in the market. And again here, it's almost impossible to tell you what is the fair market price. We all know that the second piece went on the market a couple of months ago in the region of a little bit less than $3 million. And again, many people could think that the 4 million mark, I think it fetches 3.7, all in,
yep.
But the 4 million mark is really outrageous for a Daytona. Again, when you put the watch on your wrist, you feel immediately that something really magic is going on.
Yeah.
And we know, of course, a lot of Paul Newman, we know a lot of Daytonas, we know the 6264 with lemon dial, with brown registers or whatever. But the lemon dial on a 6263 gold case, it's really a kind of magical mix. Sure. I was really impressed by the beauty, the importance, and the power of the watch.
Sure. So, Alfredo, let's talk a little bit about the Daytona that you ended up winning. So you won a 6263 Omani dial watch that you are now the 2nd owner of this watch, and it sold for $729,000,
yeah.
I believe?
Yes. Basically, what I did love about this watch was the provenance. As you know very well, scholars, they always recreate dogma for Rolex watches. We never know of a golden rule, so we create a dogma which is based on studies, on database, on action catalogs, on books, and we should make all a lot of sense. And so far, we always thought that the Kanjar 6263 or 6265 must bear a serial number that was in between of 3.7, 3.75.
Right.
And we also thought that all the example must bear the history, engraving of the case back. Now we know that it's not true. And this is the good of Rolex. Now we know that the 6263 green Kanjar owned by this pilot and that was really gifted by the Sultani person. It's a 3.0, so it's a watch that is of the 1970 and not 1974 like basically all the others.
Right.
And to be honest with you, the fact that the owner, the pilot, was there with the family, supporting, enjoying the evening, I think it was a touching moment, and I really enjoyed. I'm very happy with the watch. I think it's an incredible, authentic, and original watch. Maybe one of the most important with logo. But I really love the history. I love the provenance. I love the originality, and of course, I love the fact that the watch was never been repaired and never been polished.
Right.
I think a very great watch.
So in some ways, this 6263 was kind of a history-changing watch in its own little kind of corner of the Daytona world, you would say.
Yeah. Well, Ben, the Daytona really now seems to be like the new milestone of watchmaking. Many people could say, how is it possible that the simple Daytona could fetch more than the 2497? And I understand the concern, I understand everything. But what we should not really lose our focus on is that it's what basically the Daytona really gives to you in terms of feeling, sensations, in terms of everything. It's certainly an incredible nice watch. If you think of the proportions, if you think of the materials, if you think of the dials, I think it's probably one of the best looking watch ever.
Yeah.
Maybe. For sure, there are some watches which are now known to the public just because of a very, very, very important marketing effort, but I don't think that this is something bad. I think that marketing is important just because we know a lot of people that are currently not part of this world to know what we are buying, what we are selling, and what we are collecting. I think it's very important. And I have to tell you that this is the difference between Philips and the other auction houses. I don't really want to stay on the quality of the catalog because this is something very personal and that's just opinions. But what I can tell is that many people think that Mr. Bucks, he has a kind of a magic, but they do not realize how really tough and hard this man works with all the team, trying to basically improve the knowledge of watches among people that are currently not part of this environment. And this, to me, explains the reason why some watches really fetch a huge amount of money, like the 58 in steel and like the Baudai and like many other watches.
Cool. Well, Alfredo, thank you. We're going to move on to the next segment. Would you mind staying on the line in case we get a question for you later on?
Absolutely, I'm here with pleasure.
Okay, great. We'll be back to you in a few minutes.
I'm here.
Oh, very, very interesting.
He's one of those guys that's been around since the early days. He was easily top 5 collector in the world, about 5-6 years ago, and he's still very active, as you can tell.
Yeah, clearly. And I thought that was an interesting, sort of take-home point about the Omani Daytonas, the Kanjar Daytonas. So this was a watch that actually has kind of changed the scholarship on what's a legitimate date range for those watches.
Correct. And it's so funny. We've been talking a lot about recently about what's kind of like what makes sense, what's allowed, what's not.
Right.
There are so many kind of hard and fast rules out there that are based on almost nothing at all. It's a few scholars sit down and decide this is the date range for X, Y, and Z, and nothing else is acceptable. And then we see a watch like this, which is from the original owner that was gifted by the man directly. There's no debate about the provenance here, and it changes the history books.
And a fascinating point too from Alfredo that we all sort of collectively create what he called a dogma around the history of different models, when they were made, what's acceptable and what's not. But sometimes stuff comes along that really kind of rewrites the textbooks.
Sure does, absolutely.
So one of the things that we know from hearing from you folks that you're interested in is what we have new in the office, what we've been wearing. And I'd like to show you guys a very, very interesting watch that I've had on for about 2 days now. This is an Arm & Strom Resonance wristwatch. And what we've got here basically is we've got two balances. It looks a little bit like a double tourbillon, but it actually isn't. We've got two balances that are connected by a spring with an extremely complicated shape. Their balance springs are connected. And what these two balances are doing is actually oscillating at exactly the same rate. The resonance effect is created by the spring that connects them. Resonance watches are extremely rare. Francois Paul Journe, of course, is famous for making resonance wristwatches. The historical Emmanuel Breguet also made resonance clocks and watches, but they're quite difficult to make. They're very, very difficult to adjust. And it's not uncommon for the balances to kind of drift out of synchronization with each other over time. In the 2 days that I've been testing this one, the two balances have not deviated from each other by even 1 second. So the resonance mechanism, the adjustment, is spot on, and it took the folks at Arm & Strong quite a while to sort of get the bugs out of this one too.
Yeah, so it's funny for me to see you wearing a resonance watch because I don't know if you guys know this, but Jack knows everything. Jack actually knows everything there is to know about everything. Except reference numbers. And I remember years ago, I used to own, I actually still own, but a different one. I owned a FP Journe resonance watch.
Right.
And this is before we were working together. We were frenemies. We had a good banter going on. He said, "Ben, you know that watch is bullshit, right?" And I said, what do you mean?
I did say that.
And then what happened?
I was convinced that there was no way that the balances could be actually mechanically coupled. I thought that it was basically air turbulence, friction that was connecting them. And then I happened to actually read one of the many reference books that I have, which was The Art of Breguet by George Daniels. And in it, there was a lovely translation of Breguet's own notes on resonance watches, and it turns out that Francois Paul, who of course knows Breguet's work very well, had followed almost to the letter Breguet's procedure for establishing an actual resonance effect between two balances. Yeah. So after 10 years of vehemently insisting that the watch was bullshit, I had to write a public mea culpa because I'm having a hard time saying it. I was wrong.
One time. He was wrong one time, for the record.
More than once.
Cool. And so the watch that I have on today is one of my own, modern watch. I don't know if you can throw that up there. So this is a Laurent Ferrier Gallet micro rotor. So this is a watch that I've long appreciated. The first person to introduce me to it was my friend William Rohr, who was at Time Zone. He actually won the prototype of this watch at Only a Watch many, many years ago. I think it was 2013, 2014, something like that. And the watch was just amazing. And his watch was in steel. At the time, they were only doing it in gold. And then in 2013 or 14, I'm not sure which, when I was, for the first time, nominated to the jury of the Grand Prix, I wanted to celebrate that, which was a big distinction for me with a watch. I was in Geneva. I was chatting with Laurent Ferrier, the man, and he said, we would love to make you a watch, which he did. So this, at the time, was one of 2 or 3 steel cases. Now they do steel in the standard production with Breguet numerals, which again was unique at the time. And it's just a really beautiful time-only watch, very wearable. If you turn it over, you can see that the movement finishing on this is just, it's just as good as it gets, especially with self-winding movements. It's a natural escapement. To me, this is the kind of watch that Patek Philippe should be making today. Obviously, we know Laurent Ferrier, the man, comes from Patek Philippe. Right. It is really just a super, super high-end time-only watch that I don't think is really made too often today anymore. So it's a favorite of mine.
Yeah, and it's actually a favorite of mine also. This particular movement in Laurent Ferrier in general, the natural escapement, so-called natural escapement, is actually a wristwatch version of an escapement that was invented by Abraham Louis Breguet, called in French called the échappement naturel. And it provides several advantages over a standard lever escapement, very, very seldom used in wristwatches though. So between that and the high level of finishing, the sort of technical distinctiveness, and the really classic beauty of the overall design, I think it's a watch that really kind of almost stands alone in terms of both horological interest and aesthetics.
Yeah, I agree. And this one being in steel is just a very wearable watch every day. Yeah. I don't wear a ton just because I typically wear older watches, things like that. But in terms of modern watches, I don't think it gets any better. So now we're going to move into a favorite segment of yours, and that is what's in the mailbag. So we've got some questions. If we have any for Alfredo, we still have him on the line, or myself or Jack can answer any as well.
Well, this is actually an interesting one. Right at the very top, someone has written and is asking, Simon Bennis, is asking, what are your thoughts on the sudden increase in prices of big red 6263 Daytonas to the high 70s and low 80s as seen at the auctions this week? is there more upside left?
Sure. So I'll pass that one to Alfredo. Alfredo, what's the question is, what do you guys think of regular 6263 Big Reds selling in the 70s and 80s? Is there more upside to those watches, you think?
I think so. Of course, as usual, it really depends a lot on the conditions on the watch. It really depends a lot if there is any particular set to the watch. But for sure, Big Red Daytonas, I think that could really see another step in the value. Mm-hmm. I would say like mostly all the Daytonas. But again, I think it's very important that the watch is in very good conditions. This is for me the most important key.
Yeah, I think quality has really become the most important driving factor in value. We see similar references that are really identical in production, just different quality, selling for 5x, 6x of what the lesser condition watch sells for. So quality is everything. Great question.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sure. Let's see what else we have here. Besides word of mouth, how would you go about evaluating a local watchmaker's work, given my personal lack of expertise to reserve the quality of their work? Jack, that seems like a good question for you.
It's very, very difficult to objectively evaluate how good a watchmaker's work is. When it comes to what's being done with the movement, of course, you can obviously tell when you get a watch back whether it's working properly or not, whether it's functioning properly or not. But if you're just going exclusively from personal experience and you're going on the basis of one single experience with an individual watchmaker, it's tough. Watches are, it's an obvious thing to say. Watches are very complicated little machines. And as a friend of mine likes to say, there are no extra parts. And it's possible for things to go wrong even immediately after servicing that a watchmaker necessarily could not have anticipated. This is one of the reasons why, from a practical standpoint, quartz solid-state electronics became as popular as they did. It just provides better reliability than mechanical. And honestly, I think the best way to evaluate a watchmaker's work really is word of mouth, because you're just drawing from a much larger sample size. The statistical significance of a sample size of 1 is basically 0.
Sure.
And people often draw general conclusions based on very specific experiences. But unless there's an obvious botch on the watchmaker's part, it can happen that a very good watchmaker sends you back, an excellent watchmaker sends you back a watch, and 2 days later something goes wrong with it. It can happen.
Yep. So here's another great question for Alfredo, coming from Mark on our comments. Does Rolex still make these one-off or small number ultimate pieces for some presumably very wealthy people to make a one-off piece? Does Rolex do that anymore, Alfredo?
I actually don't think so. I think it's very difficult. I've never heard of a special guy getting a special watch from Rolex from the last decade. I actually don't think so.
Yeah. So you've never tried yourself to go to Rolex?
No, I would love to be the one, but I think I will never be.
Yeah. And my own addition to that would be I know 1 or 2 people that have tried and failed. The most, I would say, kind of customization that I would see would be, say if there's a diamond dial Daytona, they might put diamonds in a different location, something like that. But it would never be for an individual person. It would be for a retailer. Obviously, they've done some Middle Eastern market watches, some Asian market watches, things like that. But no, that is kind of part of the charm of Rolex, though.
I was going to say that part of the charm of Rolex is their absolutely implacable refusal to do anything that is not 100% characteristic of Rolex.
Correct.
That's designs, the rate at which models are released, communication. I mean, part of the charm of Rolex is that they really do stand above a lot of the whims and winds of fashion that seem to move almost every other brand quite a bit more.
Yeah, there have been many instances where we'll meet kind of a C or D-list celebrity at an event or something like that, and they'll say, well, hey, can you hook me up with Rolex? I'd really love to get a deal with them, or I'd love to get a free, Submariner or something like that. And we just kind of have to break it down and say, like, that's just not going to happen. Yeah. They don't care who you are, how many million of viewers you have per week, or anything like that. Which again is part of their charm, for sure.
100%.
Can I say something, Ben? Sorry.
Of course.
We all know of a very small series of Daytona with the Z movement 16 statuette with a blue dial, and we know that this series was ordered by the former chairman of Rolex in 10 pieces. This is something we know. I'm not aware of any other special edition since then. Actually.
Interesting. Cool.
All right, I think we have time for one more.
Let's do it.
So let's see. You know what? I'd actually like to address a question that was raised by a reader in the comments in one of our stories this week. So there was a piece that Arthur did for us on 3 Audemars Piguet watches, which did surprisingly well, unexpectedly well at auction. One of them was a steel time-only piece, 36 millimeter, sold in the 1940s in St. Moritz. And the estimate on that watch was $9,954. This is converted from Swiss francs to about $15,000, and it actually went for $125,000, little over $125,000. And in the comments, someone remarked, the way AP is relying almost entirely on the Royal Oak and still uses an external chronograph module, which it does in the Royal Oak offshore.
Correct.
I am not sure that I would even place it in the Holy Trinity anymore. That spot has long been taken over by Lange, even though they are not Swiss. And of course, so the so-called Holy Trinity, or Big Three, of Swiss watchmaking are Audemars Piguet, Patek Philippe, Vacheron Constantin. And these 3 companies have some things largely in common. They largely, and in the case of Patek, have never created a sort of more down-market watch. They've always been involved in high watchmaking. They all have a technical competence that is relatively rare. And they all have a fairly long history behind them, Audemars Piguet going back to the 1880s. So it's so why is AP still considered part of the Big Three? Why would you still consider it part of the Big Three? And this is a question we get asked a lot. Should there be a Big Four?
Yeah. I mean, I think there's 2 parts to the question. The first is, should Lange be included with these guys? Absolutely. I don't think there's any debate, and nobody that knows anything about watches would ever argue that they shouldn't be.
I mean, qualitatively, it's not even an open question.
Absolutely. So Lange is in that Big Three, Big Four, whatever you want to call it. Does AP belong there? My opinion is yes. The reason for that is, yes, they do use modular chronographs. They don't have their own chronograph, which is not necessarily true. They actually do have their own chronographs.
That's right.
It's very high end. It also has a tourbillon escapement. So they do have their own chronograph movements that Renaud and Papy helped design, obviously owned by AP. Right. So they do have these very high end movements. It's just that they're not in their consumer products yet. The 3120, their baseline movement is, I would say, I don't know, at least top 2, if not the best self-winding baseline movement there is.
Yeah,
it's up there.
A senior watchmaker for another one of the Big Three brands once described that movement to me, when it was relatively new, as one of the best new automatic movements ever to come out of Switzerland.
Right, exactly. So AP, yes, I think they're lagging behind, and every time we see them, we kind of give them a dig here and there for not having their own in-house chrono in the Royal Oak and the offshore and all that. But I think what they're capable of, what they did with the new Sonnery, the Super Sonnery, is just remarkable. I mean, I don't know if you guys have heard that. You probably have if you read our site. It is absolutely the clearest, loudest, most impressive minute repeater I've heard in years, with the exception of maybe the Grand Seiko minute repeater.
Oh, yes, the Crador minute repeater.
The Crador, exactly. And so, again, day to day, maybe not, but they do have the capabilities of doing some stuff that's very high end. Their Grand Complication Royal Oaks are amazing.
And speaking of those, let's not forget, and I agree with you 100%. I think AP, deserves its place, sort of the classic Big Three. Should there be a Big Four? Probably at this point.
Yeah.
But Audemars Piguet was making complicated watches and complicated movements, very complicated movements for other clients. They were one of the very few watchmakers historically in the Vallée de Joux who you could go to for a complicated movement.
Right.
And complicated movements by AP are found in watches with other names on the dial,
right.
And have been for absolutely decades. So I would say their history, their technical competence, their design history preceding the Royal Oak, which yes, admittedly, kind of overshadows in most people's minds the rest of the product line.
Yeah.
But I think when you really look back at their history, prior to the 1970s, this was one of the most elevated watchmakers in all of Switzerland, and was for decades. So I think they belong with it.
Yeah, and something that we've mentioned in the past few years on the site is, in the 1950s, AP was making perpetual calendar wristwatches.
Right.
And you know how many other brands were making perpetual calendar wristwatches at that time? One. So AP and Patek were the only 2 brands making perpetual calendar wristwatches in the 1950s and 1960s. So they really do. They have minute repeater history. They made some wonderful watches for Cartier. So yeah, I think that they do deserve that spot, and I think that we'll probably see some really high-end manufacturing movements in the more consumer-oriented products.
Absolutely.
So I think we'll round this out with one more question that I have for our special guest, Alfredo. So Alfredo, what watch are you hunting right now? If you could have one more watch to the collection, what would it be?
Oof. I really love the Rolex 062, the awesome paid in steel with the steel indices, like the one that just went on auction Philips, and which fetched something like $1.9 million.
Yep.
I strongly want to buy the watch. The only thing is that, my opinion, the dial was simply amazing, and the case did not have the same quality of the dial, which is, if you think about it, it makes sense. It's normal because, of course, I mean, the watch has been used for a long time. If I manage to find a very good example of awesome operating steel with the steel indices, I would definitely try to go for.
Got it. Great. Well, Alfredo, thank you so much for joining us. It's been a pleasure. And thank you guys at home. Thank you guys at home for watching us, and we'll see you this time next week.
See you next week.